Why does Cars 2 exist when Cars 3 is clearly the sequel we needed for the Cars franchise? Now, I already explained my thoughts on the first movie in my Cars review, and like everyone else in the world, I was increasingly disappointed in Cars 2. Cars 2 should have never happened. The Cars franchise is very close to John Lasseter's heart, which is why it got the attention it got, but I generally enjoyed the first movie. It's not perfect, but it's filled with a sweet enough story, some beautiful animation, and a decent emotional narrative that lets you care about the characters. Well, most of the characters. So we've established that Cars is generally a good film, just not as good as other Pixar movies. Cars 2, however, is a train wreck that put the wrong characters in the centre of a story, but Cars 3 did everything right for what it had to offer. Hi there, it's me, the Average Critic, and let's talk about Cars 3, a surprising sequel. So I had never seen Cars 3 before until preparing for this review, and I was instantly surprised from the start, as Cars 3 predicted what I wanted in a Cars sequel after what I said in my Cars 2 review. And that is, why didn't Pixar do anything with the idea of Doc Hudson passing away and Lightning McQueen trying to move on without him? The opening is really strong, giving me vibes from the first film's opening. From the opening shot, I could already see this film wanted to focus on Lightning McQueen, something Cars 2 didn't do at all. The cinematography in this film is a great aspect. You can tell we got into modern Pixar filmmaking by this movie, as the film is gorgeous to look at, not just from an animation format, but from a filmmaking perspective. Shots and lighting all look superb. Even though Cars will never have the emotional impact that other Pixar have had in the past, I do think that Cars 3 had some of the best cinematography to help make this film beautiful to watch. So let's talk about what this film does better than any of the other films, and that is the lack of Mater. Obviously, for some reason in Cars 2, they put Mater right in the center of that story, and it is awful. The first movie he is there, but he has a few goodish jokes, but it isn't necessarily annoying as you understand why he's there for the first movie. But Cars 3, he is barely even in it, and thank God, as it allows Lightning McQueen's story to shine through, as well as his relationship with Cruz Ramirez to be a good center of the film. Their relationship is really great in this film. It's believable, and Cruz has a great heartfelt scene that will make even the adults get emotional. I mean, her saying that her parents telling her dream small or not at all is really gut-wrenching to watch, especially in today's world where, in my personal opinion, every year that seems to go, it seems to get harder to accomplish your dreams. The characters in Cars 3 is probably the strongest in the franchise, as even though story is a little bit predictable, Cruz is a great added character. Lightning McQueen's role in this story is a perfect switch up from the previous two, and Doc Hudson, despite the death of his voice actor and his character, still love on to teach us a meaningful lesson. The story of Cars 3 is easily one of the most interesting of the three. It does take 20 minutes to get going, as after the opening it does drag on for a while, and could easily be better if it just had some better jokes along the way. We know Pixar can do comedy, as we've seen it in films like Monsters Inc. and the Toy Story franchise. There are some good jokes every now and then, but most of them don't hit particularly well. But unlike Cars 2, which tried so heavily to be funny with its heavy involvement of Mater, Cars 3 goes a more serious route. Yes, this film isn't that funny, but I will take a more coherent story with some serious depth than a film that is trying so desperate to make its audience laugh and failing every step of the way. So, surprisingly, this film will make children incredibly bored because it takes away a kid's favourite character and all the stupid jokes along with it. But it actually lets the adults enjoy a film about growing old and passing on the torch to the younger generation. Once again, this film feels more like the Pixar films we are used to, just without the clever humour. The music of the Cars franchise has always been interesting, as they have generally favoured a select range of royalty pop songs to use as their soundtrack. This is by no means a weaker or stronger way to tell your story, but it unfortunately does mean the original soundtrack composed by Randy Newman, who composed the music of the first film, does get a little sidetracked. But it isn't as bad as the second movie. The music works for the most part, but does suffer the same as the first movie does. They wanted a more contemporary feel for this franchise in terms of music. If you like the music you hear, that's awesome. Personally, I prefer the music of the first film, as I prefer vintage old music like the first film has, but others might prefer this soundtrack. Now, similar to Cars 1 and Cars 2, Cars 3's story is quite predictable. But unlike the first two films, this film does what Pixar does best, which is focusing on characters. Even the first movie, Lightning McQueen, is kind of a jackass to follow as a lead, but this film makes its characters' relationship to build a story, with Lightning McQueen's relationship to Doc Hudson, and then to Cruz Ramirez. Yes, Lightning McQueen is still very cocky, but seeing him being put in his place by Johnny Storm kind of makes him more humble. Watching him interact with Cruz to become her mentor by inattentively training her without realizing is a great moment. There are some great moments in this film which give it the weight of emotional depth that this franchise has kind of always needed. Learning how Doc Hudson reflects Lightning McQueen, even though Doc gave up his racing, he loved caring and passing on his torch to Lightning McQueen, which is exactly what he does in the first movie. To then see the torch being passed on again is a true emotional standpoint and works even more well because of the first film. Sequels work well when they carry on from the previous movies, keeping themes, character motivations, and most of all, expanding the story to add more layers. Great trilogies like the original Star Wars, Back to the Future, hell, even the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, despite the third one not being the greatest movie, still kept its themes and adds layers from what the previous movies had already set up. Cars 2 failed not only because of its boring story and annoying characters, but because it doesn't build off from nothing the first film had started. It created its own foundation and started from scratch. Cars 3 already had its foundation from the first film and built from that, adding layers and layers of character arcs to let this story feel natural and emotional. Cars 3 is the quintessential sequel to the first movie. Cars 2 is just a cheap straight-to-DVD film that no one likes to talk about, but Cars 3 has a surprising amount of heart. It doesn't have enough laughs and a good enough score, so this franchise is still one of the more weaker Pixar movies, but enough that if Cars 3 was the only film left on Earth, you're not going to get too bored. So with all that put together, it gets my professional rating of 7 out of 10, which is the same rating I gave the first movie. And I personally prefer the first movie, so it gets my personal rating of 6 out of 10. Technically, you could argue this film is the best of the franchise because it has the least amount of meta, but maybe it's nostalgia, or maybe because more of the jokes land in the first film, I kind of prefer the first one personally. So thank you so much for joining me in this video. I was incredibly surprised how good Cars 3 was because I really thought it was going to be terrible. But it's good to be wrong. So let me know in the comment section below what you thought of Cars 3. Did you like it, or was it as disappointing as Cars 2? Tune in next week when I get to talk about another film I've never had the pleasure of seeing, Coco. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe and hit the notification button so you don't miss next week's video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all in the next one.